Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
I think you'll be happy in the future too.
Good morning, it is 9 a.m. You're watching the briefing here on GB News. Coming up over the next 30 minutes, all the politics for you on this Wednesday morning. Not least of all, the Health Secretary insisting people should still go to Christmas parties. Will you be? We'll be talking about the politics around that. Also, changes to universal credit today mean that millions of people are better off, though millions still are worse off after that cut in the uplift. And also, we'll be giving a sneaky preview of that big interview you just saw between Nigel Farage and Donald Trump. That and much more after the news this morning with Rosie Wright.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. This is your news at 9 o'clock. The Prime Minister will face further questions about the government's response to the Omicron variant after he was criticised by his own MPs. Boris Johnson has urged people not to cancel Christmas parties or school nativity plays, promising to throw everything at the booster programme. He says all eligible adults will be offered a booster jab by the end of January, with at least 400 military personnel helping the NHS and vaccination centres. The new Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, told GB News, though, more still needs to be done to prevent the variant from entering the country.
Right, the government takes the immediate practical step of asking people to take a lateral flow test before they board a flight into the UK, because at the moment, the way the system works, you can travel to airports on busy public transit systems overseas, you can go through a busy airport, board a busy flight, arrive in busy arrivals and travel on busy transport home without having had a test, and that cannot be right, and we're calling on the government to take immediate action.
At least 42,000 social care staff left their job in the last 6 months. The government figures highlight the crisis faced by the sector, which the think tank the Nuffield Trust describes as a toxic mix of workforce challenges. It's thought that burnout, low wages, understaffing and mandatory jabs are contributing factors. Turning migrant boats back at sea is dangerous, and MPs are warning it could breach human rights. A joint committee is urging the government to scrap its plans after the Home Secretary Priti Patel suggested it could deter those attempting to cross the Channel. The group of MPs and peers described the proposed Nationality and Borders Bill as littered with measures which are incompatible with the UK's international obligations. Justin CURRELL, director of the modern slavery charity Unseen UK, says more crossings are inevitable despite the proposed bill.
What we're doing is actually putting lives at risk. We're not recognising and respecting the fact that individuals will continue to try and come to the UK. We need to make sure that we do everything we can to protect human life. We saw only too clearly last week, 27 people losing their lives in the Channel. This will continue to happen. People are desperate and they need our help, and we need to be there to support them.
University staff have launched a 3-day strike affecting more than 1 million students across the country. Around 50,000 union members at 58 universities are taking action over pensions, pay and working conditions. The University and College Union says pay has fallen by around a fifth and they're demanding cuts to the pension scheme be revoked. Donald Trump has hit out at the Duchess of Sussex, accusing her of disrespecting the Queen and the royal family. In an interview with Nigel Farage, the former US president also addressed the Capitol Hill riot and discussed whether he'll run for office again in 2024. Donald Trump also criticised Meghan Markle's relationship with Prince Harry, blaming her for ruining his relationship with his family.
I'm not a fan of hers at all, and I think she's very disrespectful to the Queen that we just spoke about, who's such a great woman, who's such a great person, historic person. I think she's very disrespectful to the royal family, but maybe most importantly to the Queen.
Christmas food shopping will be more expensive this year following an increase in overall prices. An inflation index shows a year-on-year increase by 0.3% in November, making it the first price rise since May 2019. The hike is driven by rising fresh food costs, labour shortages and transportation costs. The British Retail Consortium says the price surges were expected.
This has been coming for quite a long time. So global food and commodity prices have been rising for quite some time. Shipping prices from other countries have risen. The price of getting a container from China is 5 times more expensive now than it was pre-pandemic. So retailers have been absorbing these cost increases for quite some time. However, it's got to a point now with things like labour price costs rising as well, where those prices are beginning to filter through to final consumer prices.
You're up to date here on GB News. I'll be back with the headlines in half an hour. For now, back to the briefing with Darren McCaffrey.
A very good morning. Welcome to the briefing here on GB News, just after 9 a.m. I'm Darren McCaffrey, standing in for Tom Harwood, who's having a very well-earned rest. Today, we're going to be talking about universal credit, the changes that will see millions better off, but millions also won't see a penny of it. And also, we'll be looking at what's happening in Northern Ireland, celebrating its centenary year, the impact, of course, that Brexit may well be having on that province. But before all that, we have to talk about coronavirus, don't we? This new variant is certainly dominating many of the front pages this morning, not least of all concerns among Conservative MPs about how long these restrictions may well last. Front page of The Telegraph suggesting that many of them are written into law until at least March 2022, so at least for another 3 or 4 months. There we go, there's the front page. Tory MPs are saying that they fear that actually many of these rules may well be enshrined in law for much longer. However, the government have suggested they will be in place for just 3 weeks. Christopher Chope claimed that this was all part of a scaremongering campaign that is really designed to restrict or stop interaction between social animals. However, it's also this front page of the Daily Mail today with the Prime Minister urging people not to cancel your Christmas plans. We've heard this morning from the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, insisting that people should still go to Christmas parties, not to change those plans despite this new variant, but rather potentially to do a lateral flow test before they go to events with people they do not know. It follows some mixed messaging we saw yesterday from people like Dr. Jenny Harris suggesting people should limit their interactions. The Prime Minister, though, and the Health Secretary insisting people should, as much as they can, carry on as normal. Well, let's speak about all of this to pollster Joe TWYMAN, who joins me down the line now, the founder and director of DeltaPoll. Good morning to you, Joe. We saw, I think, 20-odd Conservative MPs rebel yesterday. Many of them, some would say, are the usual suspects in all of this. Where's the sense of where public opinion is? Because it's notable now that when I get the train in the morning, there's a lot more people wearing masks than there were this time last week since it became mandatory.
Yes, and it's really only the very early stages of this next stage of the coronavirus pandemic, and we have yet to see exactly what impact the Omicron variant will have on public opinion. But what we have seen so far, in the polling that's been released, is that the public basically has not changed its position since the beginning of the crisis nearly 18 months ago, and that was specifically an erring on the side of caution. So throughout the pandemic, the general public, generally speaking, have erred on the side of caution when it comes to restrictions, rules, and so on and so forth. And that seems to have been repeated now with the most recent polling. We've seen polls that show around 3/4 of people support, in principle, the return of the wearing of masks rule in order to deal with this new variant. Now, of course, some people watching at home may say, "Oh, well, but hang on, I don't. When I get on the train or when I go in the shops, people haven't been wearing masks," and that's true. It also the polls also show that only around half of people say that they wear their masks every time they go into shops. But I do expect that will change over the next few days and indeed weeks as this situation develops.
Interesting, isn't it, Joe, that when you listen, to some Conservative MPs and commentators who get very animated about things like wearing masks and also other restrictions, they don't seem to be in line with the vast majority of public opinion. I mean, is it just you've got your political hat on here? Is it just an ideological argument that they're trying to make, or do they generally think that actually lots more people are on their side, they're just not being listened to?
I think it depends on person to person. There are some people within politics who always take the contrarian position. There are some people who are anti-science. There are some people who are anti-vaccination, for instance, and so they will never be, or rather, it'd be very strange to see them coming over so quickly, and it'd be unlikely they would change their mind in the longer term either. But I think for a lot of people, they believe that they are representing the minority of people who believe that these restrictions should not be in place. Now, there are only a few of them in percentage terms. We're talking around about sort of 20 to 25%. But of course, that's millions and millions of people up and down the country. And though they are a minority, they do, on occasions, make quite a lot of noise. And it is possible to confuse noise with volume, which is what may be happening from some of the MPs. But I think with many of them, it is a genuine, shall we say, willingness to support the minority in this case.
And Joe, fascinating, isn't it, that I was talking to a Conservative commentator yesterday who was suggesting, Boris Johnson's not had a great couple of weeks, even in the polls, and that if he has to impose further restrictions, maybe even cancel Christmas again. Now, the government says we're a very long way off from that. That's still very unlikely. But if he has to do that, actually the public will not be very happy. And almost that understanding, that bump and support he's had this year with the vaccine rollout and easing restrictions would very easily dissipate. Quite dangerous times in some ways for the Prime Minister.
Yes, absolutely. And you only have to look at the long-term trends of polling throughout the pandemic to see how closely government support and indeed Boris Johnson's own personal support has correlated very closely with the perception of whether the government is doing well or badly when it comes to dealing with the pandemic. Now, this time last year, Labour were actually ahead in some of the polls as we approached the Christmas that was cancelled, as restrictions were reimposed and questions were raised once again about the government's handling. And could we be in that situation again this year? Well, I'm sure the government will do everything they can to avoid it. But certainly the goodwill that they received from the vaccine programme, which has really been bolstering their polling position now for many, many months, could well be lost if the situation deteriorates once again. And if Christmas needs to be cancelled for a second year in a row, that could have real implications for the government. To cancel Christmas once is unfortunate. To cancel Christmas twice could be seen as carelessness.
Indeed, and certainly for all of us, let's hope we don't end up there. Joe TWYMAN, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed, Joe TWYMAN there from DeltaPoll, joining us on where the public may well be on all of these restrictions. Well, away from England, and the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, says that all 9 cases of the Omicron variant of COVID in Scotland are linked to a single event. She told MSPs yesterday that those affected had been tested in and around the 23rd of November and had been self-isolating since. A total of 22 cases of the new variant has so far been confirmed right across the UK. Now, the future of Northern Ireland in a post-Brexit United Kingdom remains still very much uncertain and unstable. That's after Unionist politicians submitted a legal challenge against the Northern Ireland Protocol. Unionist politicians have contested in court that the protocol changed the constitutional status of Northern Ireland, shattering, they say, the union between the province and the rest of the United Kingdom, and that it conflicts with the Acts of Union from 1800s, 220 years ago. Well, to make more sense of this, we can speak to our GB News Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie. Dougie, very good afternoon, or morning rather, to you. Just explain what I suppose many unionist politicians are trying to achieve here, dating back to Acts of Union that I say are well over 200 years old.
Well, the unionist politicians here took the protocol to court, if you like, to find out the legality of it. Did MPs know what they were actually voting for in the oven-ready deal that Boris Johnson had set in front of them? Now, it is quite complicated. The first case was basically set aside, and an appeal went into action. In that appeal, it has now been reserved judgment, but in there, the lawyers and legal team representing the British government revealed that they had basically substituted Article 6 in the Act of the Union. That's the article that deals with the economic union of Great Britain, and they had substituted it with the protocol because the two were not compatible. In fact, the TUV leader, Jim Allister, who is also a barrister, a QC, he explained it to me in better terms yesterday.
And Dougie, just in regards to the impact that Brexit is having on Northern Ireland, I was reading yesterday some politicians on the other side, some nationalist politicians trying to argue that actually Northern Ireland's recovering much better than the rest of the UK out of the pandemic, and that this is a sign that the protocol is working. What's your sense of the feeling about that?
Well, you and I spent a lot of time here last week speaking to businesses, and of course there is still a lot of issues in and around supply chains and so forth, and we know that for manufacturing the protocol is good, but this place is built on consent. The Good Friday Agreement is built on consent, and that was taken away from unionists when this Article 6 has been replaced, and therefore they do not feel that they will sell their democracy for the protocol. So, again, I will go back to Jim Allister, and here's what he had to say yesterday.
What is the United Kingdom? The United Kingdom is an economic union and a political union between England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And it's based in fundamental constitutional documents. In the case of Northern Ireland, in the Acts of Union of 1800. And the economic union, based in Article 6 of the Acts of Union, is to the effect that as part of the United Kingdom, all parts, between and within, shall have unfettered trade. Along comes the protocol and fetters our trade with GB, puts a border in the Irish Sea, partitions the United Kingdom, subjects us to foreign customs code regimes and tariffs, and fetters the trade between Northern Ireland and GB. So part of our case is that the protocol, being incompatible with Article 6 of the Act of Union, is in consequence unlawful, because you can only repeal a constitutional provision such as that expressly. Parliament didn't do that. If you go to the Withdrawal Act and look at the back of it and see what provisions have been repealed, you'll not find Article 6 of the Act of Union. And yet the government's argument in answer to our case has been, oh, but it was impliedly repealed. Well, of course, you cannot impliedly repeal a constitutional statute. You have to do it expressly, and that's our answer to that. But then, this week, in the Northern Ireland Court of Appeal, in this case, the government came up with the staggering argument that, in fact, the protocol subjugates the Act of Union. In other words, overrides it. Now, in a way, that makes our case, because we've always said the protocol was union dismantling. It was unpicking the union that is the United Kingdom. Here's the government now saying, and using the word, yes, the protocol has subjugated the Act of Union. Well, if it has subjugated the Act of Union, then it has overridden it. And if it has overridden it, then it has dismantled the union. And that's why constitutionally the protocol is anathema and must be removed, because it has removed us as an integral part of the United Kingdom.
Well, you could see from that, Darren, that unionism has their argument well in pocket, but they refuse to sell their democracy, and they refuse to sell the article of the Good Friday Agreement that was based around consent. Now, Maurice Severovich will be addressing the Executive Committee here today to try and find a way to help them with the protocol, but I don't hold much hope for any of it.
Yeah, those talks carrying on, aren't they? Of course, between the UK government and the EU Commission on all this. Dougie Beattie, as always, from Stormont, thank you very much indeed. Now, closer to London, and voters in the southeast of the capital, in the constituency of Old Bexley and Sidoup, will go to the polls tomorrow to choose a replacement for the Conservative MP James Brokenshire, who very sadly died of lung cancer back in October, aged 53. It is a by-election that many are looking at to see where the impact might be, with the latest on, of course, the scandals that have hit the Conservative Party and indeed the new restrictions on our lives. Well, our reporter Alice Porter has been there to get a sense of the moods and what politics are at play out of that by-election tomorrow.
The wealthy London suburb of Old Bexley and Sidoup has had the same MP for 11 years, but that's all about to change. 11 candidates are currently standing in this by-election. So what do the politicians need to do to get the votes from local people?
Is there enough housing to go around? Around here especially, there's a lot of new developments going up, but do we have the infrastructure to support that?
There isn't as much places for mums to go to. They're having to pay for a lot more. There's not many free club classes anymore, so you're having to pay for a lot more, which if you're not financially able to, then you're not being able to go and meet new mums.
As a student in Sidoup, I just want someone who's worried not only about the older generation, but also the younger generation and, you know, how we've been affected by COVID.
Old Bexley and Sidoup has voted Conservative ever since the constituency was created in 1983, an unusually blue seat in a sea of red in London. Labour have come second in elections for the area since 1992, and Daniel Francis believes he's the man to take on the Tories.
There are only two parties that can win here in this constituency. I'm standing, given that I've lived in the borough all my life, I'm the longest serving Labour councillor here, and I've got a wealth of experience working with community groups and living here in the constituency. And clearly people who've voted Conservative for a very long time are saying to us they'll be voting for Labour and for me, Daniel Francis, next Thursday.
Perhaps a sign that the Conservatives are taking nothing for granted, Boris Johnson and other senior MPs have been knocking on doors with Tory candidate Louis French, a local councillor.
GBNews approached Mr French's team for an interview, but it was declined. Instead, they offered for us to speak to Gareth Bacon, the MP for the next door seat of Orpington. He's been backing Louis French's campaign.
His backstory is amazing. I mean, he's the child of a single parent. He grew up in a council estate in the constituency. He's always lived in Old Bexley and Sidoup. He's been a councillor now for nearly 8 years. He was deputy leader for 3. He's made a success of himself. He's all about what I see as the Conservative success story. He's broken through glass ceilings.
But after weeks of concerns over lobbying and second jobs, will the scandals be an opportunity for rival parties to gain political ground in this by-election?
I think it's mainly been the Conservative sleaze and the Owen Paterson case. In general, people have just had enough now. And people have said to me that they were lifelong Conservative voters, and they've said that they will refuse to vote Conservative ever again. They're now actually, they said to me, they will vote Liberal Democrat in this by-election.
James Brokenshire gained a sizable majority in the last election. Any dent to that this week raises important questions about support for the current leadership of the Conservative Party. Alice Porter, GB News.
Yeah, Alice points out, very odd for the candidates not to speak to us, but there you go. We will try our efforts tomorrow, though. We'll have full coverage of the result of that by-election from 10 p.m. tomorrow night here in GB News. I will be down at the constituency and the count throughout the night and through to Friday. We'll bring you those results. Now, 500,000 people will see their universal credit boosted by £1,000 a year from today. The universal credit's earnings taper rate is being cut, and there will be an applied increase to claimants' work allowances as well. Well, the Department for Work and Pensions said this means that up to 500,000 more people could benefit before Christmas, with almost 2 million of the lowest paid in work claimants being offered or being better off than around £1,000 a year on average. But let's talk to one of the architects of the Universal Credit Scheme, DEVEN GHELANI, who joins us now down the line. Very good morning to you. Millions of people, of course, will be better off through this change when it comes to the taper rate, but also many pointing out that millions of people will not be better off. In fact, given the end of the uplifts, they could be worse off.
Yes, there's a slightly challenging connection here, but I think I got the point. But that sounded like a good summary. You've got people who are in work who are going to be better off, particularly those who are earning more at the higher end of the low to middle income spectrum, benefiting the most because you benefit more by each pound that you earn. What is difficult is that those that aren't in work or those who aren't able to work on universal credit aren't benefiting. And if they were gaining from the £20 uplift, they will have lost that as well. And to give you a small sense of the numbers, about 3/5 of people on universal credit aren't in work. So 2/5 will likely have benefited. And of those, 1/5 will have benefited more or less by the £1,000 a month that they lost or a little bit more. And 1/5 will have gained a little bit, but not enough to cover the £20 a week loss from the uplift.
Do we know what the government's thinking in this is? Is it to try and encourage more people into work, to reward those that are in work more than those that are not?
Again, slightly losing the question, but I think it is the government does seem to be very much gearing toward the message that work is the best route out of poverty. And as a narrative, that works fine, and it is true. Work is the best route out of poverty for those who can work. It becomes challenging for those households that can't work, and even of those that aren't working on universal credit, the majority of those aren't expected to work by the government because they've got a disability or because they've got young children. So it's definitely a welcome move, but it is only benefiting those that are in work. And I think the question from those that work in the sector I work in, social security, the question they're asking is, what is the social security system for? And is there enough support there for people who aren't able to work to get by, particularly when you've got the cost of living going up, energy bills going up? And this all has to come out of the same money.
Yeah, isn't that the big point, Devon? Actually looking ahead to next year, whether you're in work or not, bills are going to go up. Inflation is going to hit 4-5%, maybe even more than that. I think the average family is going to have to fork out an average of 1,700 quid on things like fuel. And that means, 2022 is looking quite a difficult year for lots of people, particularly those who rely on universal credits.
Yeah, and I think that's the context that this uplift is happening. So you've lost the £20 uplift, but those in work have gained. It only offsets the amount for some, and only partially offsets it for those that are working part-time. And yes, it's being introduced in the context of rising living costs. So I don't think people's financial insecurity will go away as very welcome, and it will mitigate some of these cost of living increases. But I don't think 2022 is a year where, particularly post-pandemic, many people are going to be feeling that much better off.
No, indeed.
The main point I would...
No, carry on.
No, sorry. Yeah, the main point I was going to make is what the government does need to tackle is this rising cost of living, both with food, energy costs, and in particular housing, which drives the cost of everything else up considerably and pushes the benefits bill up without really having anything to do with claimants themselves. Those are the real drivers of rising social security costs.
Fascinating stuff. Appreciate your time. Apologies for the slight delay on the line there, which makes these things slightly difficult. But Devon GHELANI there, who's one of the architects actually of universal credit system. We look at the fact that millions of people are going to be £1,000 better off potentially over the next year or so when it comes to that, but also lots and lots of people will not, just as the cost of living is increasing. OK, away from that, we've got a sneak peek of our exclusive interview, you cannot have missed this, between our very own Nigel Farage and the former US President Donald Trump. They took a whole range of issues, not least of all about Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex. Let's have a little look at what the Donald had to say about that.
I'm not a fan of hers at all, and I think she's very disrespectful to the Queen that we just spoke about, who's such a great woman, who's such a great person. historic person. I think she's very disrespectful to the royal family, but maybe most importantly to the Queen.
There you go, and you can watch that full interview with the former US President tonight on GB News at 7 p.m. Will not want to miss that. OK, that is it for the briefing for today. I'm back again at 9 tomorrow, but you can also catch me at 3 o'clock this afternoon when we'll have all the latest political news. Up next, it is To The Point with Mercy and Patrick. Stay tuned for that. Here's the weather, though, on Wednesday. A lot of rain around, isn't it? The Met Office has the very latest. I'll see you later.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Good morning. It's a cold one again this morning, much colder than yesterday morning thanks to a chilly winds, a bit brighter in places, sunshine and showers, but the colder feel will allow potentially some snow in places overnight. Now, last night we've seen this area of low pressure develop, heading now out into the North Sea, but still providing some very strong winds over southeast Scotland and northeast England for the next few hours. So very gusty here with plenty of showers, those showers mostly of rain. Rain showers further south and west as well, much of the south starting dry, and a largely dry day with sunny spells through central and southern Scotland. The showers in northern Scotland will be turning more and more to snow as the day goes on. It feels cold out there, certainly colder than this time yesterday. Temperatures generally getting up to 7 to 9.